4 years, fans have been curious about what went on behind the scenes of Gordon Ramsay's popular show Kitchen Nightmares. What made one of TV's biggest stars walk away from a show that was so successful? The real reasons for its sudden end in 2014 were kept hidden, with vague explanations from the network and a lot of media speculation. But now, at 58 years old, Gordon Ramsay is finally speaking out. He's sharing the truth behind his decision to end Kitchen Nightmares, and it's shocking. This revelation sheds light on a choice that nobody expected, and the story behind the show's end is not what most people thought they knew. Kitchen Nightmares started in 2004 in the UK, and nobody could have predicted that it would lead Gordon Ramsay to become one of TV's biggest stars. Ramsay was already well known in the restaurant industry, but the show took him to a new level of fame. The concept of the show was simple but brilliant. Gordon Ramsay would visit struggling restaurants that were about to close, and he'd work to turn them around. Ramsay's no-nonsense, tough-love approach was what made the show stand out. But it wasn't just the restaurant transformations that made Kitchen Nightmares a success, it was Gordon himself. His raw, unfiltered personality captivated viewers. When the show crossed over to the US in 2007, it became an instant hit. People loved watching Gordon tear into bad food, lazy staff, and failing restaurants. The ratings were through the roof, and it seemed like the show would go on forever. For 7 years, Kitchen Nightmares dominated TV screens in America. The show earned multiple award nominations, including for Best Reality Show, and Gordon was nominated as Best Host by the Online Film and Television Association. But behind the scenes, things started to change. While the show continued to perform well on TV, Gordon was starting to feel the emotional toll. The initial success of the show masked some serious problems that were growing over time. The hard truth was that most of the restaurants weren't actually staying in business after Gordon's intervention. In fact, 82% of the American restaurants featured on Kitchen Nightmares eventually shut down. That means for every 10 restaurants Gordon tried to save, only 2 were still open years later. For someone like Gordon, who's a perfectionist and prides himself on excellence, these statistics were devastating. But the real reasons behind the show's end go much deeper than just numbers. Gordon has finally revealed that the toll of constantly trying to save failing restaurants was far more difficult than anyone realized. For one, many restaurant owners weren't serious about the help they were getting. After receiving makeovers, new menus, and staff training, many of them would go back to their old ways once the cameras were off. Some owners weren't cut out for the restaurant business at all, and others were dealing with personal issues like addiction, depression, or financial struggles that couldn't be fixed in a week of filming. The emotional toll on Gordon was enormous. He had built his career on dedication and hard work, and watching so many restaurants fail despite his best efforts felt like a personal failure. But perhaps the hardest part for Gordon was seeing that some restaurant owners weren't even interested in turning their businesses around. They were more focused on the publicity that came with being on the show than actually changing their businesses. The stress from this began to take a physical toll on Gordon as well. He revealed that he had suffered from food poisoning multiple times while filming Kitchen Nightmares. Many of the restaurants he visited had poor food handling, unsanitary conditions, and questionable ingredients, making every meal a potential health hazard. As time passed, Gordon found himself dreading certain aspects of filming. What had started as an exciting opportunity to help struggling restaurants turned into a battle against impossible odds. It wasn't just about whether Gordon could fix these restaurants, it was about whether they could stay fixed once he left. By 2014, Gordon had dealt with all kinds of restaurant owners, stubborn chefs, delusional owners, and completely incompetent staff members. But one encounter stood out as the turning point that would eventually lead to the cancellation of Kitchen Nightmares. The restaurant in question was located in a remote ski resort in southern France. On paper, it seemed like just another case for Kitchen Nightmares, a failing restaurant that needed Gordon's help. But what Gordon found when he arrived was far worse than he expected. This wasn't just a restaurant with bad food or poor management, it was an owner who was intentionally taking advantage of his customers. The restaurant was in a location with limited dining options, and the owner seemed to believe that this gave him the right to serve terrible food at inflated prices. He wasn't failing because he didn't know better, he was failing because he didn't care. When Gordon tried to step in and address these issues, he encountered something he hadn't expected: complete resistance. The owner wasn't interested in Gordon's feedback, wasn't willing to make changes, and seemed to view the whole Kitchen Nightmares experience as a way to get free publicity for his resort. This attitude was the last straw for Gordon. For someone who had spent years building a culinary empire based on quality, professionalism, and respect for customers, this owner's disregard for everything he stood for was deeply frustrating. The filming process became tense as Gordon realized that this was someone who wasn't going to change no matter how much help he offered. This wasn't a case of someone who didn't know what they were doing, it was someone who didn't care about anything other than making money. As Gordon would later explain, this restaurant owner wouldn't even trust him to run his bath, let alone run a restaurant. The experience was so different from the show's usual cases that it made Gordon question whether the whole concept of Kitchen Nightmares was even worth continuing. This moment of frustration marked a turning point for Gordon, and he made the unthinkable decision to walk away from the show. After spending a week at the French ski resort, Gordon reached his breaking point. He realized that the show had become a source of constant disappointment and emotional strain. The French resort incident made him see that he had been spending his energy and time trying to help people who didn't want help. He had been risking his health and reputation for restaurants that were doomed to fail, no matter what he did. For someone who had built his career on excellence, the show no longer felt like a true representation of what he stood for. So, Gordon made the decision to cancel Kitchen Nightmares himself. It wasn't because the network asked him to, and it wasn't because the ratings were dropping. It was because he could no longer handle the emotional and physical toll the show was taking on him. Gordon had spent 7 years trying to save restaurants, and after the experience at the French resort, he realized that many of the restaurant owners didn't actually want to change. No amount of time, energy, or resources could fix people who weren't willing to help themselves. The decision to cancel Kitchen Nightmares shocked both the television industry and its fans. Gordon didn't go through agents or lawyers to make this announcement, he simply called Fox Broadcasting Company himself to deliver the news. As Gordon later revealed, the conversation was awkward. The network couldn't believe what they were hearing. Here was one of their most successful shows, with high ratings and a loyal fanbase, being cancelled by its own star. Ultimately, the decision to cancel the show wasn't just about one bad restaurant owner. It was about a pattern of experiences that made Gordon realize that the original goal of the show, helping struggling restaurants, was no longer achievable. The toll it took on him personally and professionally made him decide that it was time to move on. The show had made him a star, but it had also drained him emotionally, physically, and mentally. And with that, Gordon Ramsay ended one of television's most popular cooking shows. Gordon Ramsay's decision to cancel Kitchen Nightmares wasn't an easy one. When he first made it, network executives at Fox tried to convince him that what he needed wasn't cancellation but just a break. After all, pulling a successful show off the air isn't ideal for business, especially when there's no clear reason for doing so. They tried every angle they could think of. Perhaps Gordon just needed more time between seasons, or maybe the show could be made less demanding by reducing the number of episodes per season. They even suggested altering the format to make it less stressful for Gordon. But nothing worked. Gordon had made up his mind. He had reached his limit, and no amount of negotiation would change that. The executives found themselves in a rare position. They were trying to convince their star to keep doing a show that he no longer wanted to make. The difficulty for Fox was that Kitchen Nightmares wasn't just about restaurant makeovers, it was about Gordon Ramsay himself. His unique approach and personality were what made the show a hit. Without him, there would be no show. Despite Kitchen Nightmares being a proven hit with high ratings and popularity, the network's attempts to convince him to stay only revealed how valuable the show was to their lineup. Fox executives thought about ways to keep Gordon on the show without completely overhauling the format. They suggested giving him more breaks or tweaking the schedule. But Gordon had already considered all of these possibilities and realized that they didn't address the real problem: the futility of trying to save restaurants that often didn't want to be saved. The issue wasn't the filming schedule, it was the deep-rooted problems that many of these failing restaurants had, problems that couldn't be solved in a week. For Gordon, continuing Kitchen Nightmares felt like a constant struggle against overwhelming odds. The end of Kitchen Nightmares marked a huge shift in reality television. The show had been more than just a popular program, it had become a cultural phenomenon. Gordon's decision to walk away from the show shocked everyone, especially because it wasn't driven by a dip in ratings or any external pressures. It was Gordon's own choice, and that made it even harder for the network to accept. 3 years after Gordon's decision to leave Kitchen Nightmares, Fox made another attempt to recapture the magic of restaurant rescue programming. They convinced Gordon to return, but this time with a new format, 24 Hours to Hell and Back. This new show was intended to address all the frustrations that led to the original cancellation. The concept was promising. Gordon would still be helping struggling restaurants, but with a major twist. Instead of spending a full week at each restaurant, he would only have 24 hours to turn things around. The idea was to eliminate the prolonged exposure to difficult restaurant owners and unsanitary conditions that had burned Gordon out during Kitchen Nightmares. Additionally, Gordon would go undercover at the restaurants, experiencing them as a regular customer before revealing his identity. This was designed to give Gordon a more honest and unfiltered view of what customers were dealing with, without the artificial behavior that often occurred when staff knew they were being filmed. The new format seemed like it would solve many of the problems that had plagued Kitchen Nightmares. However, despite these changes, 24 Hours to Hell and Back never quite lived up to expectations. The show was criticized for being overly scripted and lacking the genuine drama that had made Kitchen Nightmares so compelling. The 24-hour timeline, which was meant to streamline the process, ended up making the transformations feel rushed and unrealistic. Fans of Kitchen Nightmares were disappointed, and many felt that 24 Hours to Hell and Back was a poor substitute. The shorter timeline didn't allow for the kind of storytelling that had made the original show so captivating. While the ratings started strong, they quickly began to decline. By the third season, the show had lost a significant portion of its audience. After just 3 seasons, 24 Hours to Hell and Back was quietly cancelled, and Fox found itself without a Gordon Ramsay restaurant rescue show for the first time since 2007. The failure of the new show only highlighted how special Kitchen Nightmares had been and how difficult it was to recreate that magic. Just when it seemed like the Kitchen Nightmares chapter of Gordon's career was closed for good, the COVID-19 pandemic changed everything. The pandemic had a devastating impact on the restaurant industry. Lockdowns, capacity restrictions, and shifts in consumer behavior meant that restaurants which had been thriving for years were suddenly on the brink of collapse. Many establishments that had weathered previous recessions and challenges couldn't survive the pandemic. Gordon, who had always been closely tied to the restaurant industry, felt deeply moved by this crisis. What he saw were not failing businesses due to poor management or laziness, but hard-working restaurant owners trying to keep their businesses afloat amid impossible circumstances. This new context made Gordon see an opportunity to return to the original mission of Kitchen Nightmares, helping good restaurants that were struggling because of factors beyond their control. The pandemic had created exactly the kind of situation the show had been designed to address in its early days: restaurants in crisis, but not due to bad management. Gordon realized that he could help dedicated owners who were facing challenges they hadn't prepared for, rather than owners who were simply unwilling to change. By 2023, Gordon had spent nearly a decade away from Kitchen Nightmares, and his perspective on the restaurant industry had evolved. He had expanded his own restaurant empire, which gave him even more insight into the struggles that owners face. The pandemic had also shifted public attitudes. Viewers were more empathetic toward struggling businesses and more understanding of the fragility of the restaurant industry. The timing was perfect for a revival of Kitchen Nightmares, and Fox saw the opportunity to bring back the original format. This time, however, things would be different. Gordon had learned from the past and had a clearer understanding of which restaurants were worth saving and which ones were beyond help. The new season of Kitchen Nightmares would focus more on establishments that were struggling despite having hardworking and dedicated owners. This shift meant that Gordon would be less likely to encounter the kind of resistance and negativity that had frustrated him in the past. The restaurants featured on the new season were ones that had good foundations and passionate owners who just needed help navigating the post-pandemic challenges. Gordon also brought a new energy to the show. His years away from Kitchen Nightmares had given him perspective on what aspects of restaurant rescue were most important. He was still tough and demanding, but there was less of the explosive anger that had characterized some of the earlier seasons. The production style also evolved, taking cues from the original UK version of the show, with more focus on real problem-solving and less on creating artificial drama. This made the new season feel more authentic and focused on genuine restaurant transformations. The timing of the return couldn't have been better. The pandemic had changed how people viewed the restaurant industry. Viewers were more sympathetic to businesses facing difficulties, and they were more interested in seeing success stories in such a challenging time. Early reviews of the new season were positive, with fans and critics alike praising the more collaborative atmosphere. Restaurant owners seemed more open to Gordon's help, and the stories felt more achievable and sustainable than some of the earlier seasons. Gordon himself appeared to be enjoying the process again, and the passion that had originally driven him to start Kitchen Nightmares was back. However, even with all these positive changes, Gordon had to face the deeper truth behind why Kitchen Nightmares was originally cancelled. The French ski resort incident had been the breaking point, but the real reason for the cancellation ran deeper. Gordon had long been questioning the show's premise. The show's high failure rate, 82% of the restaurants featured ultimately closed, was proof that the format wasn't working. He realized that no amount of intervention could fix deep-seated issues within a restaurant in just 1 week. Most importantly, Gordon was worried about how the failure rate reflected on his own reputation. Every restaurant that failed after appearing on the show hurt his credibility as a chef and a business advisor. He began to fear that the show was damaging his brand, which led him to make the difficult decision to cancel it. Gordon knew that he couldn't continue endorsing businesses that were likely to fail, regardless of how entertaining it was for TV viewers. When Kitchen Nightmares returned in 2023, it wasn't just a comeback. It was a reinvention, with Gordon taking a more thoughtful and selective approach. The show's focus was no longer on rescuing restaurants that were doomed from the start, but on helping those that were struggling due to external factors. Gordon's new approach seemed to resonate with viewers, and the success stories felt more real and sustainable. As Gordon reflected on the past, he acknowledged that the show had become a source of frustration and professional embarrassment for him, but the return of Kitchen Nightmares in a new form gave him the chance to reclaim what the show was always meant to be about, helping good restaurants in crisis. Now that Kitchen Nightmares is back, it's clear that Gordon Ramsay has learned from the past and is applying those lessons to help restaurants in a way that reflects his true passion for the industry. Whether this new format will succeed long-term remains to be seen, but Gordon's willingness to address the problems that led to the original cancellation shows that he's not afraid to evolve and grow with the times.